Hello, my name is Annalise Barnes and I'm in partner group 16. So I made a Poplet about a couple different learning theories. Tonight, the psychologists that I'm going to look at closer are Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. Piaget was known for his theory of cognitive development, while Vygotsky was known for ZPD, zone of proximal development. And I am not used to navigating both Poplet as well as the Screen-O-Matic, so thank you for your patience while we navigate this together. Alright, so Piaget, around 1936, I believe, he was actually the first one to take an interest in the cognitive development of children. He wasn't looking at it like a lower level of the way that adults process information. He was the first one to really look at them as having their own unique way of learning and constructing the sense of the world around them. He was also interested in learning how they learned fundamental concepts, so rather than just giving tests for number identification, letter identification, really, again, how are they using their minds to make sense of the new information they're learning at school. Let's see, zoom in a little bit. He was also known for coining the term genetic epistemology, my apologies on the butchering of that, which in layman's terms, the beginning of thought process is just going back to what I was saying, was really he was interested in digging deep as far as how the children are learning new information. And his main theory was called the theory of cognitive development. A big part of his research was really giving kids more credit than other psychologists ever did, looking, like I mentioned, looking at children for the first time as being equally cognitively strong as adults, just in a very different way, not inferior. He focused on 4 different stages of development. The first one, birth through 2 years, was called sensory motor. The stage pre-operational is for children between 2 and 7 years old. Concrete operational, 7 to 11 years old. And finally, formal operational, which we are all in, 11 years old and on, to adulthood. And I'll go over the stages in a little more depth in just a minute. Another big part of Piaget's cognitive development theory is that we use something called schemas, and we use these on a daily basis, and we have from the time we were an infant. It's just looking around, making sense of new things in our environment, and how we're making room for it in our brain. Okay. Let's see. And in my notes, I wrote, as far as schemas, how does the world get categorized? So, as an example, for me working with students with special needs, at an early phase of this building schemas, if they see maybe an animal, they might be learning about worms, right? And then they see a centipede, and because the centipede has similar attributes as the worm, without coming up with a new schema, they're just going to think of that centipede as a worm. They're just going to put that centipede, because of those similarities, in the same schema. So that's an example of how we use schemas. The three types of vocabulary that are pertinent to schemas are first assimilation, then accommodation, and finally equilibration. Assimilation is using previous schemas to make sense of new information, which was just like the example that I attempted to give on the worms and the centipedes. Accommodation is where the children they have to actually modify the schema that they had before to allow for the processing of the new information they're learning. Finally, the equilibration, my apologies if I'm butchering these words, is the phase of the children, blending both pieces of information together. They're balancing the information they already had with the new information they're trying to learn. Okay. And then my other little side note here about the theory of cognitive development, and every educator knows this, is that every child is going to learn differently. So looking at the way that they're building their schemas, every kid is going to build that in their own way that's going to work for them. And then this just piggybacks on that. Children build their own personalized understanding of the world. And related to something that I talked about last week in effective teaching is that children have that suitcase or their backpack full of all of their experiences. And I think that's absolutely pertinent here, is that the way that they're building their schemas and making sense of the world around them is going to be affected by the people they've grown with and the experiences that they've lived through. Okay, and back to those 4 stages of development believed by Piaget. The big thing about the first one, the sensory motor, is that kids under the age of 2 are starting to learn something called object permanence. So that's if I had a 15-month-old and I hid an item underneath my blanket and she was able to find it, she's at this sensory motor stage where she's understanding that even though she can't see it's there, she knows that it still does exist. The pre-operational stage, which is 2 to 7 years old, the note that I put is thinking is egocentric. They're still definitely making sense of how things learn. Often they're taking more of an interest in the functionality or how something works, but they're definitely still between the ages of 2 and 7, very concerned with their experiences and how they are feeling it. They're not yet able to look at it from another person's perspective. The third stage is called concrete operational, and it's between the ages of 7 and 11 years old. And in this one, this is a really important one, and Piaget actually thought it was the most important because it's when children are learning logic, and for the first time they're able to understand something abstract without having to build it with manipulatives, as an example. The stage that we are still in is called formal operational. And more of what, 7 to 11-year-olds are learning, but obviously much more in depth, is we can understand abstract concepts. We can teach them to other people. We can logically understand them. And we can make hypotheses. We can test hypotheses. Yeah, those are the 4 stages for Piaget's theory of cognitive development. All right. Lev Vygotsky was another psychologist that was popular at the time. He believed something a little differently. He believed that in ZPD, which you can see right here, which is called zone of proximal development. And just by the name, we already know that that has proximal. Proximity means close to you, right? Within a certain distance from where your body is. So Vygotsky, I was just thinking of proximal development. This is all very different in COVID times. This is definitely, all of these things are going to be looked at in a different way, for sure. So Vygotsky learned that learning is going to take place amongst a student and the peers that they're associating with and working with, as well as the teachers that are hopefully modeling for them. A lot of people that research, psychologists, will use the word scaffolding as a synonym or a similarity to ZPD. And I'm going to break them down into 4 different phrases, but assess, connect, break down, and to not forget cues. A lot of what Vygotsky did does have modern day applications or ways that we use something that he taught us all. So a couple of different things that he influenced for us now is reciprocal teaching and collaborative teaching. And we just know reciprocal is two-sided, right? So if you're teaching your student, your student's also teaching you, as well as collaborative learning, teamwork. So we're learning a huge adult skill, and that is to work together, aside from differences. Couple different parts. I do have my notes here, so I'm just making sure that I'm talking about everything I want to talk about. My note as far as cooperative learning is that skillful peers. So it's the idea of pairing students like at center table groups of 4 or 5, but you're not just doing people of the same reading or math level. You're pulling from different levels. So the ones that have more skill in a certain area are able to help the ones that are struggling. That is the idea of collaborative learning. And from our reading, reciprocal teaching, there were 4 bullet points that were mentioned. When you're reciprocal teaching, you are asking the kids, your students, to summarize what they heard or read, question it, maybe come up with their own questions for how to better understand it, clarify something they don't understand, as well as predict. The predicting and the inference is a huge, important skill that students are working on. And to get back to scaffolding. So I always thought, really, scaffolding to me sounds like modeling, teaching. You're there, you're showing them with more prompting and then backing off the prompting. So with scaffolding, assess, you are giving them kind of a pretest. You're understanding what they know beforehand. The connection, you're relating the new information that you're teaching them to the old information they already knew. Breakdown, you're breaking their work into smaller subtasks so it's more manageable seeming. And finally, don't forget cues and prompts. this is the way that we're teaching our kids, is relying on those prompts for sure. Thank you for listening and have a great night.